David, it's a pleasure to have you here at Offstage with the New York Philharmonic at Barnes & Noble. David Robertson is the music director of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. He's also the principal guest conductor of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, has been in both of those jobs for a few years now, and is a familiar face and presence in performances with the New York Philharmonic, and is appearing here for 2 weeks of subscription programs. And it's a great pleasure to have you here. Let's start with the first program, which is the Mozart Symphony No. 34,
right.
the Bartók Violin Concerto No. 2, and the Brahms Symphony No. 3. How are programs like this chosen? Do they ask you a couple of years ahead, David, what would you like to do? Is that the arrangement first, or do they pick the repertoire and then say, who would be good at conducting this? How about that Robertson character? How does that work?
You know, it's a constantly changing thing. When you're starting out at the beginning of the profession, you will conduct anything that moves. Stray dogs, you know, goldfish, whatever happens to be animate, you know, you've got your stick there and you're waiting for somebody to say, okay, you get a chance, you know, go for the clownfish. And so the thing is, at that point, you'll conduct anything. It's a sort of a, oh, please type of feeling. And then as you know, gain a little bit of traction in the profession, what happens is that people start to realize that you might have things that would be interesting to them, and that putting a program together with you has a certain charm if it's done in dialogue. So what happens is that in a case like the New York Philharmonic, we'll have dates already worked out well in advance so that we're certain that they work in everyone's calendar. And then I usually work with the artistic administrator, in this case Matthias Tarnopolsky, who's the delegate to some extent of the music director and is there to make sure that all of the programs work in harmony throughout the whole season. And the first thing that you usually do is you find out about the soloist, who's available, who might be possible. When I heard that Leonidas Kavakos was available for this week, I was delighted and I said, yes, whatever he wants to play. We've played together many times before, and it turned out that he wanted to play the Bartók Second Concerto. And I said that was great. And we started going back and forth about various possibilities. Now, one of the real problems I've always felt as a conductor is that someone says to you 2.5, 3 years before the actual concert date, what do you want to do on Thursday 3 years from now? And, you know, how do you say where you'll be at that point? When this program was decided, I did not have 13-month-old twins. And so, you know, my life was quite different. And in fact, my response to this question, in a general sense, is to try and find a program that I feel is really unique, that I have not done before, that fits the actual place in which I am performing it, and in a sense that I'm not planning on ever franchising. I'm not going to take it around and do it as one of my programs. Now, this is really unwise as a conductor because it means that every single week you're doing something quite different.
Well, it's exciting.
It's hair-raising. But at the same time, what it does mean is that you never, ever take any concert for granted, either with the people you're working with or the actual combination of works, why they're put together, or in fact that the audience is hearing this. And it allows you to remember that in this era where we've got so many things that are repeatable through, you know, recordings of various different types and media, to actually have one completely unrepeatable experience that we all share like a conversation, you know, between the players, between the listeners, between everyone who's there, is something that's really precious, and it's what the live concert is about. So that's essentially how the idea of a program, at least for me, gets made.
Let's talk a little bit more specifically then about the connections between Mozart 34, the last symphony before the big final push of his works, and the Bartók Second and the Brahms Third Symphony. What brings those three together?
You know, so many things that it's always surprising. You put things together, and oftentimes I've found that there's this fabulous combination between instinct and intellect in the way that you combine pieces. One of the things that I knew, for example, just off the top of my head, was that there is a really fascinating harmonic connection between the way Brahms handles F major in the Third Symphony. And he's constantly going towards the subdominant and the flat side. And he's constantly toying with an F major symphony that has F minor chords in very important places, right in bar 4, for example, right at the opening. And at the beginning of a symphony where you need to establish your key, you need 3 chords to establish your key. So he gives us an F major chord. He then gives us another chord, which is a diminished chord, and we're not quite sure what it is, but we can have various different ideas, and then we're immediately back with an F major chord, and we think, okay, well, we'll wait for the third chord. The third chord, being an F minor chord, flatly contradicts the key of the symphony that we're reading in our program. So he sets up, in 4 bars, a greater dramatic tension than he has had in any of his other symphonies. And in Mozart 34, there is a moment which thankfully comes both times in the exposition and in the recapitulation of the first movement, where Mozart seems to fly in the face of his composition teachers and his counterpoint teachers, who have to say, well, you can't have false relations because then people won't know where you are. And this is the composer who's just had a triumph in Munich with the really fine Munich court opera, doing Idomeneo. And he's starting to flex his muscles. He's getting ready to be kicked down the stairs by Count Arco. He's still in Salzburg, but he can see that Vienna is calling and all sorts of musical horizons are opening. And so he does some things harmonically which are still shocking today. And they come with a speed and a conciseness that, for me, perfectly mirrors things within the Third Symphony of Brahms. Now, that's essentially why I decided to put them together. But then you get connections where today we were working on the Bartók, and at one point, Bartók, at the climax of his first movement, has a da-ya-da-da main theme, which is played by the orchestra, and he ornaments it da-da-li-di-ya-da-da. And I thought, gee, the Mozart starts in the second movement with da-da-di-da-da-da-di-da-da-da. And so there are connections that are like this just because these are 3 works that are really coming from the source of the same European musical culture. In other words, all of these 3 composers are very well versed in the history of the music that's written in the countries that they all know Bach. They all know then the people afterwards. So both Brahms and Bartók knew Mozart very well. Brahms and Bartók knew Beethoven and his work very well, Schubert, and then on it goes. You know, Bartók knew Brahms very well, and so you have this connection between all of these different composers that ends up working like this sort of fascinating hall of mirrors.